We have a guest who flew in from Riga, so therefore, let's give her some attention to her comments. Elina Griniece, who has come to us to discuss the topic of largely evaluation performance and things of that nature. Sorry, I left my program somewhere. Oh, right there. Alors, la prochaine session avec Elina Griniece qui nous arrive de Lettonie. Alors, sorry, there you go. On to you.
Good afternoon. Indeed, it's my great pleasure to be here. I indeed crossed the Atlantic to be here with you. And my name is Elina Griniece, and I'm a principal researcher at a Brussels-based policy research lab. So what we do intelligence and advice for research and innovation policy. And the reason I'm standing here today is because me and my colleagues hold now already more than 12 years of track of record working on the topic of monitoring and impact assessment of research infrastructures. So something that was not on the policymaker agenda a decade ago, and more intensively the last 6 or 7 years, because also as globally as well as in Europe, there was increasing awareness that the resources that are invested in research facilities are not only creating this environment for enabling excellent science, but these facilities also have very substantial social and economic effects that are rarely accounted for, and there was not really a common language how to talk about it, how to understand these effects. Neither there existed like a more uniform approach how to measure that. So the European Commission invested quite a bit in order to bring this field together in Europe, and this is what I've been dealing with. I've been working with very different research infrastructures in Europe, from small research infrastructures to very big ones. And we discussed this topic, we've rolled out some initiatives, and we also participated in real knowledge creation projects. So this is the reason the title of the session today is Practices for Scoping, Monitoring, and Measuring Impact. And what I want to tell you are European practices, because this is what I deal with. But I'm very, very eager to learn also about your practices. And it's a working session. It's not a panel. It's not a presentation only. So hence, I really, really look forward to your active contributions, to your questions, your comments, and general thinking around these topics, because what I would really like is to address topics that are really of your interest rather than rambling on for 2 hours about things that interest me. So, so that's very short about me, but I would like to maybe take a temperature in the room, and I don't have the opportunity to meet all of you and let you all of you introduce yourselves. But I would really, really appreciate if you could raise your hands, those people who represent single-sited facilities. So facilities that can be characterized as single-sited. Can you raise your hands? Okay. Okay. A little bit there, a little bit there. And those facilities that are distributed. Oh, that's already bigger chunk, thank you. And those can say that they are virtual data-oriented research facilities. A bit more here in the front seat are, okay, thank you. And mobile research facilities, research vessels, yes. Reason I'm asking is because it's very important. Impact is very much characterized with the way you are structurally oriented. So that's why it's important. And looking at the science domains, so who is representing a facility in life sciences? One. Okay. Okay. Good. Physical sciences. Okay. Nice. Okay. Environmental sciences. Very topic. Oh, that's all the middle. Thank you. Anybody from social science and humanities? Oh, yes, there's also representation in that. And other engineering disciplines? Okay, maybe. Thank you. And a third question of this exercise of raising hands, I really would like to know who of you would describe yourself as a newcomer to the field of impact and impact assessment, meaning I know nothing much about it, I came here, I would like to learn more, but pretty much I'm a newbie. Who would characterize? Yes, don't be shy. It's good, good. There are also some other hands. Who would characterize yourself as knowing a little bit of impact, an impact assessment, meaning you might take in a course, you might kind of learned a little bit about it? Okay, good, good. And who can say that you know something about impact assessment, meaning you have done something, meaning rolled out an impact assessment, or you thought about that, strategized about that? Okay, there. Thank you. Okay, that helps a lot. So we have, I think in general, you are somewhere in between. Very few newbies and a bit more advanced people with more advanced knowledge, but that's good. That helps me to frame this discussion and this presentation. So where is my flip chart? Where's my flip chart? So before I go into the depth of my presentation, I would first of all like to be brave. I know this is a big room and there is only two microphones, but I would really like to do a bit of agenda setting, meaning I would like to learn from you in very concrete, maybe one short point or bullet point for those who are brave. What are your burning questions, key challenges or key interests when we talk about the impact assessment of research facilities? What is the reason, what is your main interest in this session? What you would like to really capture in this session, or something that's been, it's a burning question for you regarding this topic? Braveness, okay, good.
How do you measure impact, attribution of impact? A lot of the impact that we have as facilities, I imagine I'm not the only one, the impact, we are one of a large group of organizations, research bodies that are contributing towards that impact. So how do we qualify that, quantify that in a way that's meaningful?
Anybody else?
When I think about impact, I want to know the duration aspect, the time aspect. Usually impact comes slowly, and how do you characterize that, But we need to assess impact now, but the impact comes after some time. That always bothers me, or I think about it.
So a question and a comment. The question is, how does one capture the impact of the research infrastructure I'm involved with that deals with fields as broad as criminology, education, social sciences, economics, population health? How do you actually create a narrative that is meaningful and respond, not just in KPIs, because KPIs to me are almost artificial. Now, my comment is that I think there's a real need for conceptual clarity in the terminology. And one of the things that I like to use is that there's outputs, outcomes, and impacts which are really realized benefits, socioeconomic benefits. So I like to, and I've actually been involved in some attempts to get some conceptual clarity into the discussion.
Hi, how do you reconcile wanting to demonstrate impact with not wanting to falsely claim causality?
how do you show economic impact?
Just another comment to my colleague. One of the things that I think is useful is to look at sphere of control is what you actually have and you can attribute to. There's a sphere of influence, which you are influencing, but so are others. And there's a sphere of interest, where you really want to have some impact or influence or change things, but there are many players and attribution is very, very difficult. But I think that if one's really going to look at realized benefits, you have to get to that sphere of interest, so beyond that, the areas of control.
Thanks a lot.
Taking research impact from the higher level down to the everyday lives of Canadians, or everyday lives of the public. Taking research impact from the higher level of performing the research down to the everyday impact on Canadians or the general public.
Hello. So some of our users are government, for example. And when we try to retrace the impact of our program, sometimes the information gets lost. So how can we relate the research that we do in our facility to, for example, new governmental measures, or, I don't know, in our case, protected areas, for example. So, yeah, thank you.
So if I understand, it's about the attribution.
Yeah, and making the link and following up, because we have all these KPIs, but then it's not directly transferable.
Indeed, a lot of your pertinent questions are shared across the globe by research infrastructures and practitioners in general. We will cover many of those things. So my agenda for today, I would like to do a little bit of introduction to the world of impacts, just for making sure we are on the same page. And it will cover a bit of those theoretical principles. And I think it's very important still to remind ourselves about the theoretical principles, because otherwise we don't nail exactly the core parts of the discussion. Another part that I will show you, the second one, is results from this European large-scale project that focused on the topic of impact of research infrastructures. So we want to show you what we found out about the areas and sort of causality in this large exercise. And I think it will be just interesting for you to see, and also some tools that we developed. Then I will want to walk further to address your questions of how to really think about this causality, how that comes together, how do I define and delineate things. I will talk about the principles of impact framework design, why it's important, and what it can give you, and then you can decide and tell me whether that's something that is interesting for your facilities, or whether you do things differently. And then in the last part, I would like to draw our own attention to the topics of impact measurement. So talking about indicators, sort of ways of monitoring things and the ways we measure things. Reason why I'm talking the last, because it's very frequent that when people are presented with a topic of impact assessment, they immediately talk about the indicators, right? In this case, I think it's the very last topic that we have to talk about, because there are many more important things I think we have to exchange and cover beforehand. And the last thing, then we will wrap up with our key takeaways, and I hope we will at least touch all of those key pertinent questions, would have discussed them, and also would gain some sort of new insight or new takeaway for these burning questions. So that's in short the agenda. So at the moment, I'll go ahead with a couple of my slides. So those who are well versed in impact assessment, you can take a bit deep breath and sit back. For those who are not yet well versed, I think it's important to listen and to think through the key principles and the theoretical part of it. So what is an impact? Here, as I'm coming from Europe, a bit Eurocentric definitions. So I took a OECD definition where OECD defines impact and as an extent to which an intervention or activity of your organization has generated or is expected to generate positive or negative, intended or unintended, higher level effects. And the Commission defines impact as all the changes which are expected to happen due to the implementation and application of a given policy, option, intervention, or you could say activities of your organization. Such impacts may occur over different timescales, affect different actors, and be relevant at different scales, whether that's local, regional, national, or transnational. So in more simple terms, all activities carried out by organizations will lead to effects relevant to your different users and a wider community of stakeholders, economy and society at large. So whether we plan for it or not, all our activities have an impact. And whether that's showing in a shorter term, in 1 or 2 years, in the longer term, that's a different question, but everything that we do have an impact. And another point I want to differentiate, and that's very frequently also confused, is the difference between performance monitoring and an impact assessment. Because we are very well versed to do performance monitoring, which means regularly collecting and analyzing data on activities and the results to assess progress towards achieving predetermined goals or objectives. And the purpose of this all is to identify areas where this program or initiative or activity is succeeding and where it needs improvement. So we usually do these dashboards of indicators and trace our KPIs, and I think that's something we are very well actually advanced to do, and we do it routinely. All organizations do it routinely. But impact assessment is something different. So impact assessment is measuring the actual changes that occur as a result of an activity. So what the purpose is to determine the extent of changes a program, initiative, or your activity has brought about in the lives of the beneficiaries, of your users, of your stakeholders. So it's much, much broader activity to think about. It's much more, I think, not clearly foreseeable, but you see the difference, right? The performance monitoring is something very concrete. Impact assessment is something that you think about of all the stakeholders, of all the people who use the results of your activity. And that's not something that you immediately know about. That's not something you have a very clear, not always have a very clear understanding of. So there's a lot of question marks there. That's why impact assessment is a separate field of activity and separate sort of field of profession as well. So one of the basic things when we think about impact assessment and we think about impact in general is to understand how we coin this causality. And hence we have a very specific tool that any impact assessment practice would use, so-called impact pathway logic. You know, impact is a very complex causal chain, but our brains need some sort of categorization. Hence, we put this linear impact pathway logic as a way to understand the impact as such. And the logic is simple, but it's not simplistic. So the more you think about it, the more questions you have, the more you actually think about this pathway, the more actually, yeah, you find more intricate details into it. So the logic goes as follows. So we have certain resources to carry out activities in our organizations. All activities, all kinds of organizations, whether that's research facility or any other organization. And we strive to achieve results, right? Something that we intended to do. That is what we call our outputs, meaning this is our direct result of the activity we are carrying out, and it's under the sphere of control of our organization, right? Because we account for our results, we want to make sure results are good, and we are in control of this. When we talk about impacts, we look beyond the direct results. So we get very interested into what happens to those results, whether our beneficiaries, users interact, uptake, anyhow interact with the results. And this is what we call the short-term outcomes. And if the users interact more in the longer term, then we might have longer-term outcomes. This is a very, very important part of the causal line, because this is the sphere of influence, meaning we as an organization might influence the way our users interact with the results that we are creating, but we are not exactly in control, right? You might provide a tool, you might provide a service to a user, but the user is still in charge whether he's using it to the specific activity or not. So there are many ways you can influence the users by more communication, more accessibility, making sure the tools and resources are very user-friendly, but you're not in control. And when it comes to impact, we're looking at the very, very end of this causal chain, where we look at how these outcomes, so sort of longer-term results from this causal chain, is interacting with all kinds of processes in society or an economy. So this is a very, very long, far end of the causal chain, and this is where our sphere of interest is. The problem is that we're neither in control nor we have influence over those results, because our activities as a research facility might have a certain contribution, there is longer-term impact, but also other kinds of things will happen in economy and society, have similar influences, or might even have more negative effects to what we are contributing. So this is what the peculiarities is. This is where the policymaker attention is. They want to know what the impact is, but it's not in our control nor in our influence. So there's a trick. So to give just an example how that pathway looks like and how that sort of sequencing and chopping the various effects in boxes looks like, I chose an example of training, because that's something that many research facilities do routinely. So we have a certain amount of funding, and I chose, for instance, a training activity for researchers on patient engagement in translational medicine, right? There's a certain new practice of how to engage patients in research you're carrying out, and for that you need a specific training. And the results, direct results you'll be having would be the courses you organized. You probably will definitely want to see the number of people you trained, and what kind of people you trained, what kind of researchers were they coming from. So this is something you would very, very clearly have in your reports and your key performance indicators of what the results of your activity is. Short-term outcomes, what we really want to achieve, so what is our strategic aim here is we want to improve skills, right, for these researchers in very specific areas. So this is not exactly in our direct control, because researchers can attend a training and sit nicely, but we are still not in control that they learn and form skills, because skills form when you actually apply the new knowledge that you gained in your specific environments, right? So this is under our sphere of influence. It's directly, we want to improve skills. And longer-term outcomes could be the formation of new competencies that they are applied in their environments, meaning they learn new skills and they now routinely apply these new skills in their environments, and that creates new competencies built up. And they also might have increased relationship capital because they met in these courses organized by your research facilities. They may form links, they found new interests, common interests, so there is a certain relationship capital built up that also materializes after longer term, right? And the impact part, well, this ideally results in the impact on societal relevance of research, because more and more patients are engaged in the formulation of research questions or in carrying out the research agendas. So we hope that there is an impact on societal relevance of research. So this is just one example of how this pathway looks like. So while thinking about the pathway and how we think about the effects, once you start to do it yourself, you realize that's not always so clear-cut. So you think, oh, I know what my results are. This is usually very easy. But once you start thinking about what the outcomes are, the short-term outcomes are, what the longer-term outcomes are, and impacts, you sometimes get confused where they exactly fit. But this is part of this process of causal thinking. So this is, in essence, is a hypothesis. So it's not reality. It's a hypothesis about how an impact comes about, materializes, right? It's very important that we put it out. And it's a linear chain, causal chain. It would be nice if all impacts would evolve linearly, but they don't. So reality is much, much more complex web of links and interactions, and it's more can be characterized, it's a maze of links, because one output's probably not contributing only to one outcome. One outcome can lead to many impacts, and sometimes impacts can lead back to resources. You know, if you build up a reputation of your research facility, it might mean that you attract more resources. So there is a web of links in the way impact is generated, but it's very important, at least to, in a simplified way, in a structural way, to see how that looks like. So in reality, I like to see impact represented not as a linear causal chain, but rather a tree. This is a metaphor that also research facilities came up with when we had interactive workshops with them. Because if you would reverse the tree 90 degrees, you would see that's probably how more the impact pathway really looks in reality. So we could say that resources and activities that we do are the roots of the tree. You know, nothing happens if you don't put money in and you don't do activity. Nothing happens. And then the results that we gain from these activities are the outputs. So that would be the trunk, right? So what do we grow out of our activity? That's very important. Without that, also nothing happens. What we want to see when we characterize how a tree looks like, it's not only its height, right? We want to see how exactly it's spread. So the outcomes, so these longer-term effects from our direct results are the branches. And this is what is very, very strategic to see, because unless you have the branches, you will not know how big your tree is. And impacts, meaning those very, very long-term effects, are so-called leaves. You know, they're very volatile. They might fall off. Nobody can really characterize a tree by counting the leaves. Nobody does that, right? But it's very important for seeing how this entire picture of the tree looks like. So I think that's a good metaphor to think about how in general, what's the precision we can put in thinking about impact. And why I'm placing this attention on outcomes is because this is the missing bit that's it's usually missing when we think strategically about impact assessment. We generally know very well what the results are. We would like to think about impacts, these very, very, very long-term effects, and this is also what policymakers are asking us. What was the missing link is that we don't know enough about our longer-term outcomes. And if we know that, I think we are much more stronger position to provide very robust impact statements, to be having a more understanding about our impact. And I think this is where the bridging of the gap needs to be made in this effort to do impact assessment. So that's very shortly key principles and key things. I think people already are well versed in this impact logic. So my question to you is: this new information, was there something that you already have? Is impact pathway something that you routinely work with, or are you thinking about impact still mainly in the areas of impact and what's my indicator there? So is this something that you actually think about in your organizations? I see one nodding of the head, very strong nodding of the head. Anybody else? I see also other noddings of the head. Because it's not, it seems to be, when we talk about impact pathways, people see, well, what's, I do want to measure my impact. I do want to get to my answer to the policymakers about what the effects of, good benefits of my infrastructure are in society and economy. But actually, it's proven that you haven't worked out the logic. You also won't have a very good and solid narrative. And we already talked about the need for stories, a need to tell your story. If you're very, very well versed in what the impact pathways are from your research infrastructure, that will also help to build your story. You might have the data to put a very nice figures and put very characteristic emphasis on it. You might not have the figures yet, but that logic is very essential to build the narrative and make it stronger and stronger. So that's very short, in very short terms, the basic principles and theory behind. Impact assessment in itself is a field of its own, but obviously there's a lot more behind it. But what we present to research facilities and infrastructures is just the basic principles, because you are experts in your own fields. It's only about adopting certain mindset and certain language that's important, certain impact thinking, embed certain impact thinking in your organizations. That's what's important, so that your colleagues don't confuse results with more longer-term impacts. That's what's routinely happening. Okay. Looks like a lot of nodding. So another thing I want to share with you are the results, or the sort of thinking that we in Europe have crystallized, and that's a result of long-term efforts and sort of co-creation among facilities thinking and talking about this topic. So I already said that the European Commission invested quite a bit of resources to help to gather a field of impact assessment of research infrastructures as a field, making sure facilities had their staff members trained. We had certain cumulative, sort of co-creative exercises, and there is a more shared language emerging on this topic. And the RIPath project was funded by Horizon 2020 program already quite a while, back in 2018, so it ran for 3 years. And it basically married a consortia of policy and evaluation expert organizations and then research infrastructures. So we got partners of research infrastructures, synchrotrons, as well as distributed infrastructure, life science, Elixir, as well as CERN was part of this consortium. But we engaged throughout this project more than 30 research facilities in Europe who helped us think and create certain findings of our interest through these activities. So all in all, it was a unique project. There hasn't been any other project like this in Europe. But we build on this experience to work with the research facilities further. And the goal of the project was conceptual. It was to improve the understanding of the long-term impact pathways of various types of research facilities. So their facilities come in very different shapes and sizes, but the idea is that can we work out what are these causal pathways when thinking about broader societal effects from research infrastructures? And are they common among facilities? Do they differ? How do they differ? What can we learn if we really talk about our experiences and our observations in this field? But then the outcome that the Commission also insisted, and we very much liked this, was that outcome should be very practical, meaning you should give policymakers and funders and research infrastructure managers certain tools to assess the impact, to think about impact, to say, where do I start? How does that look? How does the map look? What are the concepts and what are my steps in order to do these activities inside my facility? So this was part of the mission. As I said, the approach was very participatory, meaning we engaged, it ran across 3 years. We engaged more than 30 facilities in the rooms like these, where we worked around tables and sort of crystallized our understanding about the impacts and what kind of effects we see. Samantha Kula was also part of one of these workshops, and we had one fantastic trip to CERN. So that was part of Canadian influence as well, input into these discussions. All in all, what people said, it felt really, really important to have a community of research infrastructure staff members who were engaged on the topic of impact. They learned together, and they shared a lot of practices, how those assessment efforts are carried out in specific facilities. So even if there was no huge conceptual revelation, I think people just were very happy they were not the only ones striving and thinking about these topics in their own organizations. So what was the outcome? We published an online toolkit. So the idea was whatever comes out of these discussions and this conceptual work should be accessible online. It should be interactive so that facilities who have a certain level of knowledge can go and engage directly with the areas of their interest, and they would not have to read 300 pages long PDF documents to find the information that they specifically are missing. So that's why I also suggest for you to note down in case you want to get more information, more inspiration, and sort of more knowledge into what we learned through this exercise. It's ripathtool.eu. It's already a couple of years old, so if I did another tool nowadays, that would be much more refined already. So we're looking forward to get additional funding in terms of updating this tool, making it more relevant for very specific types of research infrastructures and very specific questions. So this work is ongoing. We hope that will also materialize. But another result was also a PDF document, a shorter one. We called it the accompanying guidebook, where people who are new to impact could actually read it in a narrative way. It's sort of it's accompanying guidebook on the journey of understanding impact assessment. So if you have also colleagues that don't deal with these questions but are eager to do some reading, this is a good start. It's a simple visual visual PDF document with lots of cases and links in the document for case studies and other things. So this is, in short, the two major outputs. But what I want to present to you, maybe key things, one of the key things that came through these discussions and sort of thinking about impact assessment was a list, not an exhaustive list, but a list of areas where research infrastructures in general seem to have impact. It didn't exist before. I mean, people knew there's an impact on economy, something on society, but not like an exhaustive list where people had contributed with concrete cases of where impact materializes. And I'm not going through all of them in detail, just for you to have an understanding. So we had 4 broad categories or areas of impact. One of them was impact on human resources, whereas many facilities wanted to reframe impact on talent development, which is a very, very crucial part of where research facilities are having effects in many different forms and shapes, but an important part. And obviously, this includes impact on research jobs and career development, no-brainer, skills development of the RI personnel, but also professional development of the staff members. It also includes skills of non-scientific staff and users, so competences that are developed outside of research and beyond the core focus of the facility. It's also technicians, non-scientific staff, very, very important aspects that are frequently overlooked. Then we also had focus on the relationship capital and international collaboration, because in many cases, research facilities attract educated people from all kinds of parts of the world. So it's also lots of networks are built and international consortia are built. So there's a lot of networking effect in this aspect as well. Better working conditions, meaning, you know, with the facilities being built, there's a steady workplaces that have very high standards as workplaces as such, so maybe a secondary impact area, but still important. And then obviously also many other wider effects of how concentrating new competences are having real benefits, right, for the increase of research vocation or overall educational level in the region, and many other points. So all in all, this part is one of the key effects on society that research facilities are having. There are many case studies, many interesting ways to trace this impact. The second most frequent impact area is impact on economy and innovation, also no-brainer. So business and industry, facilities frequently help business problem solve through their tools, through their services. There is a big impact on suppliers through procurement of technology, goods, and various services. There are also benefits to supplier reputation, right? If you have a very, very important research facility and you are a supplier to these research facilities, obviously there's also reputational benefit that brings another round of economic effect. Then labor market and productivity for simple things like is also job creation, right? Building a research facility, large-scale research facility. Productivity effects, just because there are more efficient processes, as well as perhaps salary premiums of highly qualified staff members and many things like that. Technology transfer and innovation, surely. This is also one area I think you probably are looking at. Innovation in industry, creation of spin-offs, and many other aspects related to the technology transfer. And then a last one, that is more characteristic to single-sided facilities is the impact on local and regional economy, because if you build a research facility in a specific geographical area, there are very clear benefits on the area itself. And also many case studies and many studies that showcase the extent of these benefits. And these are also reported in this guide through the links to case studies. Less, perhaps, researched, appraised, and studied area of impact are so-called broader societal effects. Many facilities are not well versed to deal with. We don't have lots of case studies. It's all ad hoc, but it's still something that is increasingly more and more attention is paid to. The fact that new solutions, technologies, and open access data and software creates very concrete applications for society. So that's a very clear societal benefit that emerges. And, and obviously also open data and software for civil society organizations. There's a clear societal use for many of the applications. Also, the fact that research infrastructures support knowledge creation for society in different domains is an impact on its own, right? So we create knowledge for addressing societal challenges, including health and well-being, and addressing public sector challenges, and environmental and social sustainability. So that's an impact on its own. Also, public awareness engagement. So general public understanding of the benefits of science is thought to be also a very concrete effect from building these facilities and making sure that their activities are communicated, and public engagement with the science. Well, maybe through outreach, training of journalists and stakeholders. Another interesting area that is characteristic to very large-scale research infrastructure that capture the imagination of society are cultural impacts. We found that CERN is very much looking into their cultural impact because given the facility they are a bit mystical and also very, very inspirational for many people. There's also certain cultural effect of movies being shot or being, that being represented in art. So that's another aspect of an impact that some research facilities are showcasing. Social inclusion. I was very impressed by the presentation of this morning, how structured and how well thought through this area of impact is for Canadian research infrastructures. It doesn't happen everywhere, but apparently that there is a clear case for that being an impact. Environmental impact could be an area on its own, and I think in Canada that's also taken as an area of on its own. We grouped that as a separate area because there's certain facilities that have clear environmental angle where we can scope the contribution. In some other cases that might not be very specific. And last area of impact that we looked at, and we realized this area hasn't been thoroughly also considered when thinking about impacts from research facilities, but in fact there's a lot of contribution, very important contribution, is impact on policy. So policy, regulation, standards, and institutions. Research facilities hold certain expertise. It's very important for drafting regulation standards. Engagement with policymakers is something that some facilities do routinely. Some realize they have this capacity, but haven't realized this is actually an avenue for impact. Science diplomacy, global facilities, right? Building of international partnerships. Sometimes there is a certain leverage, in scientific diplomacy because that scientific facility is there and operational. Co-funding and sustainability, well, contribution to creating models of co-funding maybe, and other aspects of ensuring research facility sustainability. ethics and trust in science. That, I think, is a borderline with impact on society, but also was part of the discussions. So how development and uptake of ethical codes and conducts in research also might feature in. So all in all, this is a list. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this just represents the scale of benefits that research facilities may have. And many of those benefits are not really realized, or they are maybe hasn't been the core of the strategy, right, to develop these impacts, but they still are there. They're actually very relevant. And by recognizing these impacts and thinking through how facilities are really materializing this impact, this can be a very powerful part of the narrative or the storyline that you tell. It's not just about enabling science. We also do this and this and this and this, and it's wide, and it's important contribution from these activities. So that's any other areas that you think, oh, this wasn't discussed in Europe, but we feel this area of impact is very, 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 very much part of our thinking. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for that great overview and insight. I just wonder, you presented all the positive impacts and benefits that our facilities can provide. And of course, as public funded facilities, we are all striving, and our mandate is actually to serve the public good. But there may be some unintended consequences, and there may be some actual negative impacts. What are your thoughts, or what is the thinking on how to assess that and report back on it? I think we all do it, probably through our risk register and trying to mitigate any negative influences. But is there some thought in general on reporting back out on what we're finding?
Indeed, the fact has also the definition that says that activities will always have an impact, but the impact might also be negative. When we were running these discussion groups with facilities, we didn't pick out a very broad range, very clear negative impacts. The impact might be small, the impact might be, not negligible. The only area that we really realized that in some cases, the environmental impact was negative. And I think as in a research community, this impact assessment is not about bragging things that you are not actually having a justification for. If there is a negative impact, that shouldn't be underestimated, shouldn't be left out, because that's a fact. Recognizing that the facility realizes and has, for instance, a mitigation strategy, that's the best thing that the research facility can do. But omitting it wouldn't be neither appropriate research practice nor actually something to support. So I think it doesn't make your case. The fact that you realize what the negative aspects of the activities of research infrastructure are doesn't mean that you have to leave them out. I was just wondering if you had any concrete areas that you find, oh, this is where activities are actually creating something negative, because the only thing is the environmental impact. The other things I haven't had concrete, very concrete cases. Maybe you are aware where your activities lead to not so great effects.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes knowledge, as I said, some inventions are not, but that's not something that we can predict per se, but recognizing that is just a standard practice. Yes?
Hi, at the outset, before this comment, I want to tell everyone I do not know, it's Elina.
Yes.
Right? I do not know Elina. So this isn't a paid announcement, but I can tell you that at the Canadian Research Data Center Network, we did use the RIPATHs tool. And you know, this question of impact and the relationship to outcomes and outputs and all these kinds of things, it's very nebulous and difficult to deal with. But I can tell you that using the tool was helpful to us. The interactive tool is very user-friendly and helped us to think creatively about how to approach this kind of impossible problem of demonstrating impact. So I would encourage any of you who haven't given, it doesn't take very long actually, maybe my first sitting with it maybe was 45 minutes, like the very first sitting, and then I went back, you know, to do a more refined version, but it was really helpful. And in terms of one of the things that came out for us to help us think about what we could do was I was surprised to see what the interactive tool kind of spit out at us. One of them was an impact that would be counted, something could be counted as an impact, is changing curriculum. It was considered an impact. And so that is something that made us start to think creatively like that. And as a result, for example, one of the things we created is we have CRDCN's 7 slides for the classroom, and we've shared them across the 44 institutions, they're collaborating institutions. So if there are people teaching classes, we have these default slides where they can introduce the students. And whether you want to talk about, I mean, that's not raising a community out of poverty kind of impact, but it just helps you, it helped us anyway to think creatively about doable things. So yeah, just the shout out to the RIPATHs tool, it was useful.
This comment really warms my heart because indeed you cannot have a very specific guidance for the diversity of facilities that exist in this world. So what we really wanted, that it is an iterational tool, right? You go somewhere where you play with something and then you have your own kind of creative thinking of what is relevant for your facility. So this kind of really warms my heart. Spent almost 3 years working on this project. So thanks a lot. But it's not only impact areas that actually one of the main product of all this interaction and this project was to think about very concrete pathways, so the causal chains, right? It cannot, again, be very, there had to be a certain level of aggregation, because we're talking about all kinds of facilities, but still was very important that we had an understanding what are these causal pathways. The generic level, right, across the board. So we identified 13 such pathways, how investments in research facilities lead to various impacts on economy and society. We specifically focused on socioeconomic impact because scientific impact is something the communities are much, much more averse to showcase. And the pathways were grouped along 3 high-level missions because the mission of the facility is very, very tightly tied to the impact you might have. And there was an enabling science, the core mission. There was also problem solution, that might be a mission for more applied facilities. And then these intricate links between science and society, which were a bit more difficult, disentangle. So these were 3 categories of pathways. And again, I will not go through all of them because they are available online, and you can explore them at your own pace, at your own of your interest, drawing your own interest to the specific areas. But I just wanted to showcase how these pathways look like. So there was enabling science. We had 6 pathways. So one related to the publication, citation, and recognition, so more like the science push idea, you know, that due to the enabling of the facility, we can publish scientific papers, they get cited. Later, that finds recognition with a broader research community, so there is this cycle of science push. There are also a pathway related to employment, operations, and standardized procurement, also something we touched when we talked about the impact area of economy. Technology and transfer and licensing, another very, very frequent pathway. Then learning through joint development of instruments and tools was an interesting revelation, because there are many facilities that engage with private or public entities, and they jointly develop certain tools. So there was a learning not only on the facility side, but also on the organizations that engage with the facility. Also very interesting skills building impact that's happening. Learning and training by using RI facilities and services, that's something also where the skills aspect comes in. As users use the tools, they also upskill. There's a learning processes happening. And training in higher education cooperation. Some of the facilities have more formalized cooperation with the higher education sector. So that's also where perhaps the impact on curriculums come in. And it's not that all the facilities do that, but there's a certain share of facilities that could name these pathways as relevant. Then 3 pathways related to problem solving. So some of the facilities interact directly with industry with the aim to solve their problems, right? That's part of their mission. And that's a very clear impact-generated pathway. But some of the facilities are also doing similarly with public sector organizations, NGOs, less frequent, but also addressing societal challenges through their support services, through their tools. It's also a very interesting part. And another major contribution, sort of this pathway, how impact is generated, is the provision of specifically curated and edited data. And that's where the data-oriented research facilities are doing a fantastic job, because of the curation of the data, it's not only becomes more visible, but also much more easier to use productively. So it means there is a productivity impact from this work of curating data that's not always recognized in full extent, but it's very, very important in addressing societal challenges. And then last area, the so-called science and society, was very interesting, because this is something facilities rarely really conceptualize, how they interact with society and these broader questions of society. We found that as an interesting pathway of how facilities, and especially if they are distributed across various countries, are changing the fundamentals of research practice. So it's both in a cognitive and methodological sense, because there is you also, when you conduct research in certain distributed manner, right? There are certain rules, processes, toolkits, procedures developed that is enabled because it's a distributed facility, and that eventually also sometimes improves methodologies. That is a part of the impact, changing the research practice. Creating, shaping scientific networks and communities, another very clear networking effect that happens, because around the facilities, there are creation of communities of practice, not only of researchers, but also of users. And that's another spin-off for wider effects. I already noted the promoting engagement between science, society, and policy. So policy impact, how do facilities interact with policy, but also then how do they address societal challenges that come perhaps from NGOs or governmental organizations that are not directly linked to private sector. And then communication and outreach, that's also this wider awareness of science. That's sort of a more standard way of thinking about what our impacts are. So again, the descriptions of these pathways and sort of also a schematic way of how this pathway looks like, including all sort of available indicators, generally used available indicators, can be explored in this tool. Again, Not that this pathway is directly one-to-one applicable to your situation, but once you read through the narrative, you might think whether this also applies in my case, whether I see something else. So I think it's a shortcut already to your thinking about, you know, the causal links between various effects. And once it's a, you know, communal sort of gathered insight, I think it's also more validity to this field. Yeah, that actually is an effect, because we realize that many distributed research infrastructures that, you know, don't have, especially data-oriented, they fail to coin the benefits because, you know, you don't really see very visibly. It's not like you build a synchrotron and then you have an impact on the local economy. It's sometimes these networked effects, your relationship capital that is built, you know, curation of data. It's hard to pinpoint the exact benefit, but pinpointing is exactly what needs to be done to make sure that, you know, the impact narrative is really powerful, because there are many effects. They sometimes are intangible or not, you know, not well discussed, or there isn't a good case study out there about networking effects or, you know, this relationship capital. But when you talk to the infrastructure, it's like, yes, this is exactly what we are good at. This is exactly what we bring to the world. So recognizing these effects is what is already a huge step in further efforts. Measuring it is the very end of it. So that's in short about our iPath project. There's, as I say, explore the tool. I will not use any more time on that. What I want to discuss with you, and what I want also to hear your experiences, is so one thing is to understand how an impact pathway works, you know, plus minus, and understand, you know, there are many areas of impact, but where do you start from? Or how do you start, like in your organization, where do you start? Like who is convened around the table? What kind of things you want to create? So that's why all tables must have some Post-it notes on your tables, but I would like to have your small discussions around the groups and the tables that you are sitting around. Two questions. One question is, who is thinking about impact in your organization? Is it somebody who's doing strategy? Is it somebody who is, you know, doing the KPI reports? Is it somebody who's very specifically interested in this? Do they have, is it in their job title, at least partly? Is there nobody who's thinking about that? That's also an option. So who is thinking about impact? If you could discuss that around your tables, but also put this in on the Post-it notes. So the person or the title or the type of people that are thinking on the Post-it, because I would like to collect all that on one sheet of paper. And the second question would be, so if you realize that there's one person, there's few people, there's nobody, so what are the challenge, you know, in your impact assessment process? So where do you start? What are your key challenges that person faces, or the group of people face, or what is the key challenge of kickstarting a process? So understanding your impact or starting to measure it. So also on the Post-it notes, if you put every single challenge that you coin just on a single Post-it note, that will help a lot. So I give you exactly 12 minutes. So 10 minutes to talk among yourself, just share like who is doing impact. Is there somebody who is having it in a job title? Are you thinking about might having in the job title? And then challenges, and just put your individual points on the Post-it notes. I'd like to collect them. So 12 minutes. Okay. I heard quite a bit of chatting, quite a lot of exchange. My really my pleasure would be now to harvest your conversations. So the outcomes of your conversations, unfortunately, time is limited, and Samantha is promised to have a nap time, so we have to finish on time. So I will ask the post-it notes on who is in charge of impact and the challenge to place when the session is over on the post-it, on the flip charts there to my right, so that at least I can see what kind of topics you discussed and what kind of issues that you exchanged. But what I want to do in the next coming 15 minutes, I want to share some of the approaches that we have engaged with research infrastructures and developed on this topic, because we've been working with small and big organizations from the scratch, with the organizations that are already running for a decade and just newly established facilities. And I think there's emerging certain guidance or principles that seem to be beneficial to these facilities. And I want to showcase a couple of examples of how facilities in Europe have kickstarted their thinking about impact and what they've done. So I'm talking about impact framework design. So when I'm talking about impact framework, what I mean is actually sort of an at-a-glance overview of all the relevant pathways of the research facility, so that there will be something to share, right, on a piece of paper, preferably on one page, that you can say, okay, I look at this page and I see where my impact is coming from. And that would outline most relevant impact areas, but only the ones that are strategic, right, not the whole list of what's possible. And that would really, and that's the most prominent pathways that are judged by you as important, as key, as something you invest in monitoring and measuring. And design of such an impact framework indeed needs to involve the key team members in charge of the main lines of activity, because when we have an idea, okay, we have a facility, we know we do this and that, but we haven't had a comprehensive overview. Nobody in the team has a comprehensive overview of all the impacts. You need to convene around the table people who are leading key lines of activity, whether that's a communication person that's in charge and been there for 10 years, whether that's a person who works with a tech transfer area. So people who can really have observations and have a solid view on the interactions with the stakeholders and beneficiaries, because you cannot construct your impact pathway. The impact pathway is constructed based on your observations, because what you're building is not the reality. You're building a hypothesis of how the impact might look like. And you prove that hypothesis or disprove it or by using data. So that's why first is the hypothesis, and then you start with the data collection and analysis. So this means that you really need to assemble around the table key people that can help to develop such hypotheses. And it turns out it's not such an intensive effort, after all, because you really need to know who are the people around the table you need to convene. You need to know what kind of questions you need to answer. You need to have them collaboratively work, but for a limited period of time. And then you have to make sure that this view from these key people is validated, is edited. It's really making sure that it's a shared framework. So it should allow a shared understanding of this topic among all your staff members, stakeholders, beneficiaries and funders. So while thinking about that, was also my idea. This is actually an area where we, as an organization, can help research facilities to engage a couple of exercises like this with small facilities and also with large facilities. So one of the facilities we developed such an impact framework was European Infrastructure for Translational Medicine, so EATRIS. It's a distributed research infrastructure in life sciences. And they also were at this crossroads saying, we are interested to showcase our impact. We know, roughly what we want to do, but we need some sort of something solid, right, to showcase and something to build our strategy on. So here is an example of an output from these conversations and interactive collaborative work, showcasing an impact framework of this facility in the area of key societal impacts that they were interested in investigate. So I'm not telling you need to read it. It's not possible to read this all, but I think it's the visual impact that's important as a communication device, because what they, in the end, managed to do, they managed to put all key pathways that they find of relevance into one picture. And that was done by outlining the key activities, meaning not the detailed activities, but rather groupings, distinct fields of activities that they say, well, this is what characterizes our facility at the moment. They were able to list outputs, meaning direct results from the facility. What exactly are they creating? Again, aggregating by clear groupings. And key thing was that they then showcase how that leads to outcomes. So what are the strategic results? So not the direct results, but the strategic results. And then, linking it to key impact areas, which in their case was impact on well-being, on policy, knowledge valorization, kind of bit abstract and maybe too abstract. But the important part was that when looking at that picture, they said, well, this is what explains what we do. Like, I see my activities, I see my direct results, I see my outcomes. So it's actually also a device, how I can communicate what my research infrastructure does for the benefit of society to wide audience. But also when looking at the list of outcomes, so these longer term, this is what they realize, they recognize, this is their strategy, meaning this is what their strategic aims are, right? And while this picture is a tool and it's an exercise, they realize it's not only for impact assessment that this framework is beneficial. It's actually also very beneficial for the strategy making, because they can see how their strategic objectives align to impacts probably policymakers are interested in. They can look at impact pathways from if they want to increase certain impact, what kind of activities should they start doing more, and vice versa. So they realize, well, it's a great internal tool for also supporting strategy, but also communication, because they made sure that the impact outcomes and output sort of titles were lay-friendly, meaning they were explanatory and lay-friendly, so it also was good for communicating what the facility is doing. And this framework obviously didn't come out so nicely. So if thinking about one exact pathway, there was a full list of pathway charting sheets. They were messy, and they were working sheets, and then they have lots of iterations with, what kind of aggregation do we want to see? What exactly are we doing? There was a lot of messy charting sheets. But then, through this messiness and through aggregating this messiness, they were able to come up with a solid one-pager, very nice pager, of their impact framework that they still continue using now. Another example of such exercise was with a much bigger research facility, ESO, which is European Southern Observatory, the world's most advanced visible light astronomical observatory. They have their facilities in Atacama Desert in Chile. And they also said, we are interested to scope, the comprehensive list of our impacts. And we want to measure it all as well. So we will hire you to do that. And while interacting with them, we realized, well, one thing is these are two different activities, you know, to think about scoping a framework and then measuring an impact is two different, maybe, two different activities. But indeed, working with them, and that was also didn't take too long. I think we had a couple of months of interactions with this infrastructure. We came up with a much more messy impact framework. Also, don't read it, it's impossible. But that also was an aggregation of all the pathways that they realized they are very relevant for their work. But they did it a bit more simple. They opted out from the direct results, meaning, you know, if you know well what your activities are, probably the important part is to list your activities and then, you know, your strategic outcomes and impacts. And they ended up with 9 different areas of impact and then a list of outcomes. And the interesting thing is that when they presented this and validated at the General Assembly, also with a, you know, with a request, do you recognize your infrastructure here? Are we, you know, is this something you see impacts really pertinent? The same conclusion was drawn that they looked at the list of outcomes. Well, it's nice to have a list of impacts, it's nice to think about that they're strategic for you, but then they looked at the list of outcomes, they realized, yes, this is exactly what our strategic aims are. So I think there is something about investing in more thinking about, you know, the totality of your impact pathways, and also putting it quite visually. So my future project is that, you know, these kind of impact pathways are barely readable and also barely presentable to anybody who's interested. But if you turn this kind of framework into a digital tool, meaning into having a bit more advanced visualization options, you would actually have a visual tool that you'd showcase, you know, how your pathways, you click on activity, it would showcase or light up, for instance, the pathway, how does that activity lead to what kind of impacts, and vice versa. For instance, hovering over impacts, you could see what kind of outcomes and activities contribute that. I think it would be a much more a great exploratory tool, first of all, for the staff members who work on impact assessment, staff members who work also on strategy, to see, okay, this is how we think, we theorize, we hypothesize the impact from our activities looks like. And it's very, very important because then suddenly all the questions about the indicators come in a different picture. Because in the end, what you want to measure is the strategic things you want to prove, right? So if you see that one of the unintended impacts that ESO was also surprised about to see, but they realized that actually, while it is not their mission in anyhow written, their activities actually lead to very clear impact on the professionalization of science communication. Because they have a facility that is very inspirational, right? It creates a lot of beautiful pictures. And obviously science journalists want to write about it. So their activities, ecosystem activities have created a good also impetus for science communication, the way it professionalizes. And this is something they didn't intend. This is something they just realize is happening, and it's a nice way to communicate an additional added value from having this kind of activities. So all these kind of things of what are our intended impacts, maybe there are other unintended impacts that we haven't thought about. This all comes through this interactive work with your staff members. Who say, oh, actually, I don't see this causal link exactly like this, because in my experience, this isn't going exactly like this. So all these discussions create something more tangible, something more robust than just, you know, ad hoc, linear, causal pathway that we think it is. I think when it's shared discussion, it has, you know, much more robustness into this hypothesis than it would be if you just task one of your colleagues into making sure that the impact report is done, right? So there is value in it. There are more infrastructures are currently exploring doing this, also for this kind of reason, that it seems to be a good exercise to do. And the good thing is that it hasn't costed us a lot of time. So, and also hasn't costed a lot of money, right? Concrete meeting, concrete interactive exercises, preferably moderated, facilitated, and then, you know, harvest the output and validate the output is maybe where most of the effort goes into. If I would be given the resources to make sure the visualization looks, you know, is interactive, that would be even better. But I think that's what I want to, that's what I wanted to showcase from where European facilities are currently moving, and where we see more and more support required also in these kind of activities. So yeah, maybe questions, because I think we already interacted earlier in the day on the topic of, okay, what's the sequence? How do I do this? Where do I start? Maybe you have also other questions about impact framework. Is it interesting to do something like that? Would you do it differently? You do it in a more simplified manner? There are many ways to do it, but it does require quite messy interactive work. Yeah, but that's the beauty of it. Once you do the messy part, at some point, some point also the beauty of crystallization comes, and then you realize, well, this is a good, not only beautiful picture, but actually a communication tool and a bit of a strategy tool as well, if you wish. Questions? Reactions? How eager would be your staff members to engage in this messy pathway drawing work? And would they see, well, you deal with your indicators, I don't want to get, yes.
So you've mentioned that you were funded under Horizon 2020. You've provided your report to the Commission. How on the implementation side, did they say that's the gold standard? Let's measure all of our investment over the course of the last X number of years, and let's move on with that. What was the retroaction from the Commission on your work specifically?
Yeah, so the project that was funded by the Commission, it's ended in 2020, so I'd say there's a legacy from the project. Ambition of the project was indeed very high. So tell us what the impact pathways of all kinds of infrastructures are, preferably in a very modular manner, and give very concrete tools to research infrastructure managers and policymakers on how to do it. Basically, that was the definition. Obviously, when we started work, we realized, well, in 3 years, what we managed to do is actually a very important step, but it certainly isn't, you know, silver bullet. It doesn't answer all your questions. But as a colleague here already said, I think it was very important because we managed to map, and we provide a certain map of what actually is happening, seem to be happening, what the indicators are. We convened a list of indicators that are currently already requested. We didn't invent any indicator. It was like, okay, this is a list of indicators that's currently requested from research facilities by national and by supranational bodies, and we just compile it, right? But make sure there is a distinction. These are activity indicators, meaning this is measuring activity, and these are indicators that would actually say something about outcomes and impacts. And we categorize them, and they are all available on this tool, and basically you can, you know, pinpoint whether that relates to human resources or economy and society. But there, when you compile all this list of indicators, and you have some understanding what are the key pathways, you realize there's a mismatch. So yes, they answer very important parts. They're important, but many of the important things are missing either. So the picture is not perfect. So I think Commission was very happy with the results from this project, but in a sense, we created the map, we gave some tools, there's much more to do. So what I would really like to do is, on the basis of RIPath project results, create a much more detailed, guidance. Okay, if you are a distributed infrastructure in life sciences, there's very clear common pathways, right? There's a very clear way to, extract indicators on those and those specific areas. So there's many things we could do more. Well, funding, so Horizon Europe, if European Commission will be interested. But I think it's the important part of the RIPath project was that it wasn't, we collaborated with European facilities, but the aim was global. We also had to interact, and we're more than happy to interact with similar counterparts who did similar efforts in Australia, Canada, CFI, South Korea, and South Africa, and US. For that reason that, the questions are the same, right? It should be sort of a common effort. So I think there's definitely more to do. And I think on the tools part, there are very clear, interesting areas where there is an actual real nice tool to be used to measure the policy impact of research facility without using, extra efforts from your facilities, using external data sources. So these all kinds of guidance and tools, they emerge. They just need to be compiled and made available and sort of categorized in a nice guidance way. So I would say there's much more to do. But as an inspirational tool, apparently it works. So I'm happy.
Yeah, so I really want to commend you on what you've done. I mean, you've clearly invested a lot, and I really do hope you get the funding for the next phase to turn this into a much more visual and interactive tool. We would absolutely use it. I think this process is really bringing a lot of clarity, and we use a much not as detailed version of that actually as part of our annual program planning process to help us focus our strategic activities. And we use it as a communication tool, not just externally, but internally. And then it actually helps all of our staff members to see what they do, because they are all distributed, what they do, how that informs ultimately the outcomes or the impacts of our facilities. So I think it's really not to underestimate the value of
yeah, indeed, very, very, very good comment. So I would also reiterate that it's not only helping communicate what infrastructure does to, lay audience society, but actually communicate within infrastructure. Because once you convene everybody around table, there are some people who worked for research facilities for 10 years in tech transfer. They say, I never thought we had such, this kind of spin-off from, your communication activities. In the end, they also haven't really figured all the effects from the activities. And I think it could be just good community building and awareness building tool within the facility. Especially if it's really big, with lots of activity lines. So thank you a lot. That's indeed, I would also reiterate that. Anything else? Okay, then we have exactly 10 minutes to go to indicators. But I think this is the exciting part. I think this is where what we are not doing, we should be doing more. We should make it complicated, but we should make it rigorous in terms of co-creation. Not in terms of making it extremely complicated, but in terms of making sure the rounds of co-creation are really proper and nicely implemented. So, yeah, so just a couple of things. So an impact framework, why the impact framework is not just focused on the impact pathways, but also on individual pathways, but you also are able to show the links between the pathways. So that's why we need that framework, right? Because individually, it's nice, it doesn't explain everything that happens. It does include what's relevant, and it is a comprehensive hypothesis, right? We still need to prove that what we think is happening with data. And co-design is the heart of activity that I mentioned, and also the fact that it's strategy and design and communication tool. So all in all, I also want to say it's a very fun activity. Once you start doing it, I've seen people who started doing it without any knowledge and without actually much enthusiasm. They realize, well, this is something I really enjoyed. So lots of joy in this activity. So measuring the impact, and I put this title in parentheses because there's only so much you can measure in impact. I'll be honest. So it's not neat and nice, and you won't have a nice figure always at the end, but you might have very nice figures that support your storyline. So again, the pathway, the same pathway. So what I already outlined, outputs, is the part that we capture with internal reporting, the KPIs. So if you have struggled to decide what is an output, what is an outcome, think, what do you capture with your KPIs? What do you report in your annual strategies? That's your result. But what I also said beforehand, the aim for the monitoring is this bit further down the line interactions that we don't have usually much data on, but this is what we really, really would like to know. And sphere of influence impact, actually, there's an accountability line. You are not accountable for everything that goes on in economy and society, and never will be. But there is this request, to report on impacts. I would say, take it easy. If you know well your causal chain of activities, and you're very, very good and invested in understanding your outcomes, probably it's not so important that you don't know, cannot characterize the very final impact. I don't think that's the major thing. I think it's the important part is to be better at reporting outcomes, understanding them and reporting them. And indicators, also in the tool, you can browse around. We had the same categorization. As I said, there are differences between indicators. So they are activity indicators, also KPIs. And what they do, they actually allow to assess whether right things are being done. So are you doing the right things, what you're supposed to be doing? Outcome indicators are different. It allows to assess whether doing these things matter. Here comes the strategy. So whether doing these things really matter. And impact indicators allow to assess how big the overall added value of all these activities may actually be. And when you go from the left to the right, you will notice that KPIs are very easy to express quantitatively. This is also what we do, numbers and shares. And outcome indicators, they can be expressed quantitatively, but there will be always some need for some qualitative angle of that quantitative indicator. I will showcase how. And impact indicators are rarely ever really expressed quantitatively. Let's be honest, we don't count the leaves of the tree. We just need to know if the leaves are green and red and when they're many or they are fallen down, basically. So that's my blunt maybe a suggestion to you. Examples of indicators, so activity indicators, so just a distinction between them. So again, taking training, activity indicator would be the number of researchers trained, or the number of training measures by type of target group, something very quantitative, easy to get. Outcome would be satisfaction of people trained with the course material, or rating of the applicability of gained knowledge. You can say that it is quantitatively, you are able to express it quantitatively, but there's a qualitative part in this indicator. That is what matters. That is what the essence of the indicator is. An impact, evidence of the effects of the new competences on career development, or evidence on the increased prestige of the training provider. And sometimes we all the time think about indicators, there must be numbers, or there must be simple. Sometimes indicators also anything that gives you evidence. So if you have 3 occasions, you don't have any quantitative indicator, but you have 3 occasions how this affect increased prestige of training provider, then it means that's the best you can get. You have ad hoc evidence, and that's better than nothing, right? So that's maybe in very short words how they differ and why they differ. Tools for data collection. I think key essence is that we really need to keep track of, there should be a systematic tracking of the direct results of the outcomes, right? Because irrespective what you do, irrespective what systematic tracking of your direct outcomes is is the basis. We need KPIs. We need them systematic. We need them longitudinal. And it's what you do, and it's part of the internal monitoring. To get outcomes, to get something more tangible for outcome indicators, you usually do need to reach out to those stakeholders, beneficiaries, impacted people. How you do it? Usually through surveys. And we know there's a survey fatigue. Not everybody will reply. Unfortunately, there are few other methods to get this kind of information. But what is a good strategy is, instead of launching, a dedicated survey to these outcome indicators, you might think about how your existing surveys might help, and include a couple of impact-related questions into already existing surveys that you already send out annually. So that is a strategy many facilities have used. So just think about impact questions you want to, and see where you can integrate. Don't launch a new survey. And then unavoidably, carrying out various qualitative analysis and case studies. There are too many intangible impacts that are essential not to do this. And obviously, not everybody has skills in-house, but qualitative stuff matters here. And a good positive side note, there are existing interesting databases out there in this world that helps in impact assessment in very important ways. And obviously you need specialist knowledge, or at least interact with somebody who has that knowledge. But I've myself used Overton database, which compiles, policy papers globally, as a very important, interesting tool how to extract external data about policy impact from your facilities, if they are referenced, but even if they're not all referenced very properly, it still is an interesting external data set that doesn't require you doing data collection. Similarly, as with career development, there are interesting tools how to use LinkedIn and AI tools to kind of get interesting aspects. So if you really want to do something and you want to measure something, it's not that there are no tools around there to help you. You might just contact people who do that routinely or had that knowledge inside the house. So guidance, also just 3 bullet points. Complex analysis requires appropriate skill sets. You are experts in your own field. You don't have to know everything about how to measure impact and how to do these methodologies. But you are requested to report on impact, so consider what's feasible and apply the principle of proportionality, meaning whether the invested effort in compiling new indicator, running that methodology, thinking about how to scope that impact is proportional to expected value. So if it's not a very strategic impact area, probably not. If it's a very strategic impact area, probably you want to invest, even if in external studies or extra person doing extra data analysis or data mining. Numbers matter, but they matter in the context. I couldn't underline that more. Case studies and well-constructed database narratives can be a very powerful tool in communicating both. Because indeed, if we have separate indicators, it's nice to have them. You might put them on a chart, but will you know what the baseline is? Is that good? Is that good that you have this kind of numbers, right? So unless you have some narrative and context, and again, here comes the qualitative part, you might not put that in perspective. And then also an overall finding, neither quantitative nor qualitative approaches alone can solve any problems and provide a satisfactory answer to your questions. So it's only smart and rigorous combination of this method that really matter and that are needed. I think that must be recognized as a basic thing. So another few closing thoughts, just very quickly. Challenges, if I think just name 3 challenges, what I think research facilities face when they are scoping and measuring the uptake and impact of their facilities, is that no one-size-fits-all approach. Sorry, but there won't be any universal guidelines ever, so you will have to do the work. The good thing is it's not always that time consuming, and it's not always wasted. Sometimes it's very beneficial work. So it still lies on you, but you need guidance. You need really guidance, and you need also support and tools. That's also another point. Availability of data and relevance of the available data, very important point. We might have lots of KPIs, and sometimes facilities like, large facilities like ESO comes and asks, we have all these KPIs, it's all collected, it's all nice, do an impact assessment. Say, you know, that doesn't ring a bell. So relevance of the available data sometimes are more important than the bulk of data. So that's why I think the framework and thinking about the impact pathways is relevant. And then already said the complex analysis requires appropriate skill sets. Sometimes think about having someone with the proper data skills, maybe for 6 months to do this job. Sometimes you can do it on your own. You don't have to do it complicated. Sometimes you need to procure a study, because you really want to have that number and have that beautiful chart in your report. Opportunities. What I think is an opportunity is that systematic stakeholder mapping may provide the needed clarity, because if you know who is interacting with your results, that's a huge step forward, meaning you really know who is using it, or who is at least thinking about it, or who might use it. So if you have that, I think it's already a huge step. Again, repetition, so more rigorous use of qualitative insights can mitigate the lack of solid data. Again, if you do it well, it is powerful. If you think that only quantitative data will provide you the answers, then it might not be the avenue forward. And then, as well as I mentioned, untapped potential for the use of external databases, something that Commission and other funding bodies should also fund, so we can actually have a ready-made tools provided for you to explore your impacts and uncover the unexpected impacts is the best part. So this is all. Maybe if you're very willing, we're already three minutes past the thing, but I'd like to take a couple of key takeaways or some closing thoughts from you. Something that maybe triggered you, something that you think, this was a useful bit, or something that's like, I'm doing this my way, and no way I'm gonna do it this European way. Anybody willing to share some closing thoughts? No. If not, then I would really want one thing. I would like you to use your Post-its where you noted down who is in charge of impact and what the challenges are, and post them on the sheets of paper to my right. I would really like to just browse over them, because this is what I do in my work. Thank you, and let's have a break.